Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello and welcome to Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech, history, culture and identity, both at home and far beyond it. I'm your host, Vít Pohanka, and this episode is part of an ongoing series about the lives of Czechs who now call the United States home, a country that dominates headlines, often for the wrong reasons. You might recall my conversation with Adam Holomoucký, a young Czech graduate living in North Carolina. You can find it in one of the previous episodes. Today, I speak to Julie Urbišová. She is a journalist by profession who often works with Czech radio and Czech television. But her life has taken many turns. She runs a yoga studio in New Orleans, in southern United States, and she's also the voice behind a podcast of her own, Doma ve státech, or Home in the States. And I think with good reason, because for her, home is not just one place.
I am completely different in America. I have different personal in America. When I came to Czech, I feel more like I am back to my childhood, as I say, like I have different behavior here. And then I'm in Turkey, the way how I talk, the way how I behave, it just changes. So I see it on myself that I am not Czech anymore, only Czech anymore.
So Julia moves between three cultures, the Czech Republic, her husband's native Turkey, and her life in the American South. But it's not just about geography, it's also about raising children in a multilingual home and trying to keep their Czech language alive.
I am very realistic. I know it might change, like my older daughter, she used to read in Czech books. Now she doesn't care anymore. She's like, Mom, it's so difficult, I don't understand. And the younger too, I'm reading her, I'm trying to read her in Czech, not every evening, but I try to. And I can see she's 8 years old now, and I can see it's getting more and more difficult for her because there's so many words that she doesn't hear in our daily life.
And like many immigrants, Julia observes America's political divisions with quiet concern, wondering, questioning, but often staying silent.
Most of my neighbors are Republicans. And the neighbors I know, they're good people, in fact. And I wonder, I'm not brave enough to ask them what they think, how they see the changes, how they see the behavior of the offices that they basically chase people. Okay, they're illegally here, but those people were promised something within the previous governments.
So get ready for a story about adaptation, identity, motherhood, and finding your voice in more than one world. And just to make that clear, I caught up with Julia when she was in the Czech Republic. So when she says here, she means Czechia, and when she says there, she means the United States.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
I am from a small village in Silesia, which is a part of Czech Republic. I am a journalist by soul, for sure. I am a mother of two beautiful girls. My husband is Turkish, so that defines me quite well too. And I'm a yoga teacher. I have a small business in New Orleans that I do yoga classes for children in elementary schools.
I think your story, or rather the story of your family, is really fascinating. And I'm not using that word lightly. You already mentioned that your husband is Turkish. So where did you two meet? And how did the chemistry kind of work? How did you ended up together? I suppose it's quite a long story, but if you can just briefly try to explain that.
Well, I came to New Orleans to study at University of New Orleans in exchange program with Charles University. That was in January 2007. And my plan was to only stay there for one semester. Back in the time, I was already working for Czech television as a reporter in culture division. And I was very happy with my life back in Prague. So that was only to explore US because, of course, I grew up in 90s and I was always watching TV series like Beverly Hills 90210 and so on. So I really wanted to see America one day. When I figured out that Charles University has this exchange program, that was perfect. So I decided to go and explore. And immediately, I'm not lying, probably the third day of my stay there, we had orientation at school. And my husband, came as a volunteer because he already knew Czech students from the previous semester. And he realized that Czechs and Turkish obviously have a lot of things in common. And he offered us help. He helped us with driving us to grocery stores because, as you know, in America, nothing is close by. So there was no grocery store close by to the campus and so on. And that's where it started.
Okay, and I suppose your relationship developed and you got married. And in one of the interviews that I listened to with you, I heard that you spent some time in Turkey too, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like for you?
Well, let me explain. So when we met and when I moved after this studying program finished, I moved to America to join him in New Orleans. And at the same time, I realized that America is not a country for me. Like, I didn't want to stay. I'm saying it openly. Like, at the beginning, I was very much ready to go back to Europe. Everything was very different for me. There was some typical cultural shock going on for me. I missed my family. I missed my friends. I missed walking, taking tram to work and things like that. So it was really difficult. And after some time, we were talking and we were like, okay, so what should we do? Which country should we go to? And after discussing many options, we realized that Turkey could be a good option, not only because, of course, he has a support system there. He studied there. His engineering undergraduate program, he would have connections and so on. But also I took it as a pretty good challenge for me because Turkey is absolutely interesting country in terms of reporting. There's always important news going on. Turkey is a very important country, not only in the region, but for the whole world for many reasons. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but I came to study anthropology, ethnology. And I was always very much interested in different cultures, different languages, nations. And to me, Turkey was such a great challenge that I could learn a new culture. I could actually learn, everything where he's coming from. I could understand more his behavior, his family patterns, and so on. So it was a good decision at that time for sure. It was amazing for me because I could not only start a new life, but again, I started a new career because I became a reporter not only for Czech radio, but for Czech television and other media. Because back then there was no correspondent in Turkey. I believe Czech television has a reporter in Istanbul now. But back then there was no other person, so I was quite busy at those times.
Which part of Turkey did you stay in? I don't want to say did you live in because you then decided to go elsewhere. Because from what I hear, of course, we often underestimate how big Turkey is and how diverse Turkey can be.
Yes, definitely. I lived in Antalya, which is quite a touristic place in the southwest by the Mediterranean Sea. So it's definitely a beautiful place to live. And it's quite international too. A lot of not only tourists come during the whole year because it's not just a summer destination. It's a perfect getaway for tourists from Europe in the winter time, actually, because it's always sunny there and a very beautiful area of Europe. I still consider Europe, even if it's not actually geographically in Europe, where to spend their time. So I was in Antalya, which also, as you mentioned, it's not quite the typical Turkish city, you would say, because it grew tremendously over last 50 years. I was just actually there last week, and I was doing some research for my podcast, where I was trying to report on some specific things of Turkish culture, and I found out information that in 1920s Antalya only had 30,000 inhabitants, while nowadays it's a city of like more than 1.5 million of people. So it's just grew crazily, and of course everything has changed over the times, because the tourism changed the city completely. What I also wanted to say is it not only tourists, but a lot of there was always a big Russian community. Even though like 15 years ago, there was already back then like around 10,000 Russian people living there. And that number obviously grew since the war in Ukraine started, because Turkey is a good place for putting their money in, let's say. So they see big effects after the war in Ukraine started, in a way that the prices of housing grew incredibly. That's one of the effects.
So I suppose, I'm not quite sure whether you mentioned that that's because especially young Russians are trying to flee Russia because they don't want to be recruited to the army.
Yes.
Roughly. There are so many questions that come to my mind when you talk about Turkey. But again, Czechast is about Czech culture, history, society. Did you meet a lot of Czechs there?
There were some Czechs, yes, and there was not like crazy big community, but let's say I knew probably around 10 to 20 people at those times. But again, it was like kind of at the beginning of social media time, so I'm sure nowadays it's much easier to get in touch. But yes, there was, most of the time it was girls like me who somehow met a Turkish man and moved in, started life there. Or they were, I know there were some people working in tourism. It was quite nice in community. Like I remember back then I was working for the Czech television documentary program, actually focusing on Czech people living abroad. And I did a couple interviews with those ladies, and it was wonderful to see their experience. And it was not always just great experience, of course. That was kind of my thing, that when I moved to Turkey, I was going there with this quite, as we say, pink glasses on my head, because I only saw like the great cuisine and the history. And again, I was a culture reporter, so I was always focusing on that. But of course, when you live there, and as a journalist reporter, you read the news daily in their language. Like once I learned Turkish, it opened up much more for me, of course. And I realized how many problems that country has, and how politically that country basically was in big problems already 15 years ago. And unfortunately, I was watching it, and still, of course, we are still watching it with my husband with sadness right now, because Recep Tayyip Erdogan is a kind of person who is trying to lead the country only like under his leadership, and he doesn't give too much space for other politicians.
When you speak about the problems, I suppose that would be like domestic violence and stuff like that.
Not only that, the country is changing in terms of, for example, education system. Education system is supporting the religious schools in last, let's say, 10, 15 years. I know it from my friends who are same age with me, and who are really desperately looking for places for their kids in Europe where to send them. In fact, one of my friend's daughter studies in Prague now, and he's very happy that he got visa for her and she can study university in Prague, because they don't want to see their children's future in a state that is basically, they see as their children don't have really good future in their country, not only like when we talk about the religion, but also economically. Turkey has incredibly high inflation. The prices over the years increased. I can't believe how regular people can afford living there. I just came from there, and it was like American prices, like food in restaurants. It was like prices in America, and you have to think that there is no way people make as much money as in America in average. So life over there is very, very difficult right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've been in Turkey only very kind of briefly, changing places and stuff like that. But I remember times when I was a correspondent of Czech radio in Brussels, when there was a still big debate about accession of Turkey into the European Union. And that was even before Recep Tayyip Erdogan that you mentioned, the present president, who's been a president for a very, very long time before he was in power. And the question whether Turkey will be an EU member state wasn't so much about if as about when. But now it has completely changed in the past 10 or 15 years, I suppose.
Yes, that is absolutely true. I remember the same. I don't know what to add, but yes, that is absolutely true. Unfortunately, what I see in last, again, like 5-10 years is how Turkey is basically doing propaganda against Europe. They basically say to the voters, look, we don't need them because, they don't appreciate us anyway. They look at us down. They don't want us. We keep begging. So let's just don't worry about it anymore. And, I am here for you. I'm saying as Erdogan, I'm here for you, and I will make sure that you will feel great in a big Turkey with this big pride and so on. That's a big factor in Turkish culture and character of people. They have big pride, and he knows how to play with it for sure.
One last question about Turkey. You kind of fleetingly mentioned your great podcast, by the way, Doma ve státech, Home in the States, which I cannot promote in English, unfortunately, but it's in Czech. And I think you mentioned kind of fleetingly that you were working on a story there recently. Is that right? And if yes, can I ask about what the story is about?
So it wasn't really story. It was just that I was there, and some people on social media asked me how life is there, and can you share a little more? So I basically recorded 5 videos explaining stuff. But when you ask me about my podcast in English, I started it in Czech, yes. And then some of my friends in New Orleans asked me, hey, we really want to see what you're doing, so why don't you do it in English too? So I recorded, I think, only 2 interviews in English this year, but I plan on adding the English versions also. So, again, if somebody's listening to me, they can look up. I have my Patreon websites also in English, so you can find really interesting Czech stories in English too.
I will definitely include the link to your website and to your podcast on the Czechast webpage. But I hope this is not too nosy a question, but I can't help asking it. So your husband has got an American citizenship and Turkish citizenship, or how?
We are all citizens.
You are all citizens, full citizens, yeah?
Yes.
Let me just briefly mention my experience, which I tell people, but usually Czech people in Czech when they ask me, how did we go about schools? When I first came as a correspondent back in 2008, I lived in Washington, D.C., D.C. proper. Now, public schools in D.C. proper are notoriously underfunded. You can go to charter schools, but that's kind of difficult to get there. And I happened to speak to someone from the Secretary of State's office. We were waiting for an interview, an employee of the American Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he explained to me, well, if you go to Montgomery County, which is in, for example, Bethesda, which is on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., you wouldn't even know that you left the town, but you are in a different county. That's where a lot of people, go if they want to go to public schools, because Montgomery County has got very high real estate tax. You have pay a lot of tax on your homes, which goes directly to the county, which then, if I simplify it, maybe oversimplify it, then can fund the schools in a much better way. So if you go to, I think 2 counties were mentioned, Montgomery County or Fairfax County, around Washington, D.C., then the public schools are great and you don't have to pay for the private schools where you would probably send your kids if you stayed in D.C. So I looked up the right zip code, the right school, spoke to the director, well, the principal, and she said she would be happy, to accept our children. And then I found a place to stay, and then our experience was really amazing. I mean, when my son first came to school, there were special classes for him in English. And he learned English so quickly because he was about, this was in 2008, he was 7 years old. And I like to say that children are like sponges. They literally soak the new language. And the school was really perfect. And then I learned that it was, deemed to be one of the best public schools, elementary schools in the whole of United States, just because it happens to be where it is. So do I understand correctly? You found different schools in New Orleans, and how old is your daughter, by the way?
So my daughter right now, she is almost 13. Yes, absolutely, I agree. Unfortunately, Louisiana is one of those states that the education is one of the worst in the whole United States. So it is, and for me as a foreigner, it was very difficult to figure out the system because, in Czech Republic, it works like that where you live, you just go to a public school and you don't really care much. Of course, this is changing a little too nowadays, but in general, I think we can put it that way. While in New Orleans, I realized it's completely different. Like you don't even think about public school, honestly, because they're in such a bad shape, because they're underfunded. So there is a big tradition of Catholic schools, private schools. And then there are a couple private schools, non-religious. There are maybe 4 of them in the whole city, or maybe more, but I'm not now talking about high schools because now we moved on to high school topic in my family. So you don't have, what I'm trying to say, you don't have too many options, okay? And within the public school system, again, as you said, there is this charter schools, but you can only get there, with certain conditions of your financial situation, your color of your skin, and so on. So we had to go to the private school, and it was quite experience too, because of course, in private school, you are a customer. So everything works. You have a problem, you go, you tell the problem, and the problem is being solved because they need you there. So that also brings up question for me as a parent from Europe, though, like how well the education is. We had a feeling with my husband that they fall behind in math. Let's say that the teachers are not strict enough. They don't practice enough. They don't know the multiplication table like out of their head in the middle of the night, like as we were taught in Czech or Turkish public school system. So it was a very interesting experience for us to compare all these different educational systems. But at the same time, what I'm trying to say is that in the private school, we saw how the children are much more in the center of interest of the teachers, and in a good way. My daughter just graduated now from the middle school there, from 7th grade, and she told me in her last couple days of school, she said, "Mom, I'm so happy that we ended up at this school, I'm like, why would you say that?" She's like, I felt that I got all the opportunities and my life completely changed, and I'm very confident. And, hearing a 12-year-old saying things like that, it gives me chills still, because I'm happy as a parent that I made this decision. And again, I don't want to compare now, nothing. I'm just saying my experience right now. And I said it to the teachers, to give them feedback. And I think what is the biggest difference between those systems in Czech and in US is that in US they really try to make the kid feels special about something. Let's say you're not good in biology, whatever. You're great in theater, and they make you a star. They make you feel like, you are amazing. Or it can be in sports, it can be in, other things. While I'm not saying it's not like that here, but here we are more, and I always ask that question myself, why are we like that in Czech Republic, that we don't have the confidence? Why the kids are kind of shy and, they are kind of scared to show their qualities or tell the opinion? Is it because during communism we all had to be same and we were punished if we weren't same? That's how I kind of easily explain that to myself. But again, like we had only good experience. But again, we are in the private system now with my older daughter.
On the other hand, my younger daughter, she is 8 years old and she is part of the public school system. She was lucky enough to pass a test to get into a good public school, one of a few public schools in New Orleans with good results. And over there, it's completely different story.
Again, I can compare now, and I can definitely see that the funds are not enough, and I can see how actually the parents are volunteering so much that's something I don't know from Czech Republic growing up here at all. Like over there, a lot of moms just spend their free time on organizing events. They meet up over the weekends and prepare things, shop for things, like organize fundraisers all the time. Last summer, and if you know New Orleans, you know how summers in New Orleans are. There is a heat of 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Like I'm still not good in Fahrenheit after 15 years. Let's say 40 degrees Celsius. Humidity like crazy. And the parents got together and they painted kids' bathrooms. And they painted lots of beautiful paintings around the building to make it nicer for the children. And that all comes from the volunteering of parents. And unfortunately, that's something that needs to be done because the parish, the school system in Louisiana is very, very undeveloped. And when you mentioned those differences, let me also say that the taxes thing, there was elections this spring that was supposed to raise the taxes, like that would be used for the school buildings. It wasn't passed. Like people voted no. So yeah, that's the state and parish that we live in.
You are listening to Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. I'm your host, Vít Pohanka, and in this episode I'm speaking with Julie Urbišová, journalist, yoga teacher, podcaster, and a Czech living in New Orleans.
I don't want to overgeneralize, but would you agree that within the American system, the parents have a tendency, if they really care about the education for their children, that they have to get involved more than the parents in the Czech system would? That Czechs are a little bit fatalistic, perhaps, or feeling more comfortable with the state taking care of the education of the children?
I think yes, in general, but if you look at the situation in like this year and last year about the admission to high schools, we can see that that's also changing because high schools in Czech Republic, as I see it, and again, like my friends' kids are going into that age too, so I hear it from my friends. They don't have enough spots, so to be able to actually be admitted in a good high school, you need to pay private tutors and so on, and you have to be involved. And, that is changing too, comparing to how I grew up. Like, again, as you said, yes, like when I was growing up, like there was no question. You go to this school, you were born here, you go here. And then for universities, if you're a good student, you just apply and you get in. While in America, that is true. You need to be involved and you need to, that's what I didn't know that at the beginning either. So that is also interesting for me to compare like my first child and my second child. With the first child, I had no idea about nothing. Now, knowing where it's going to, for example, sports. sports, it's just fascinating how it works with sports in America. How important topic it is in middle school, let's say, okay? Like my older daughter, like she was never part of those sport clubs and so on. Then in middle school, she wanted to join a volleyball team. And it didn't happen because she had no idea how to play volleyball. And, there are, what is it called, that you need to pass to be able to get trials. They're trials, right? And she couldn't pass the trial. So she was basically, out of the sports system at her school. And I consider that as quite unfair because I was like, how is the child supposed to learn the sports when not at school? And later on, I realized that, American parents put the kids to sports really when they're like 4 or 5 years and they let them try everything. And then at the time of being, 10 years old, they know quite a lot about the sports. So that's what I learned. And now my younger daughter, she's playing softball the second year already within the parish system, which is amazing in New Orleans, in our neighborhood of Kenner. That's what I'm learning now, and I didn't know that before. Like they have a sports program for children year round. You can try all the sports, and you pay, let's say, $15 per those 2 months. So you need to learn. You need to learn the system. But yes, in general, like I can see parents in America being very, very involved. But again, it's difficult because like times are changing. I can see here too in Czech Republic now that the parents.
You are absolutely right. Yeah, you are absolutely right. And I suppose my wife and I, we were lucky because when both our kids needed to get to high school or secondary school in Czech, this was before the problem started with the sports, with the wave kind of young children who were born to the so-called Husákovi děti generation. So there was a big kind of upsurge in the number of, and it still is, but it will pass probably after some time. But it makes parents, even in Czechia, that they have to be much more involved. But we are still talking about the high schools or secondary schools, and we are not talking about the colleges. And when I looked up, I was writing something about how much it costs in the US to go to college. And I was using various statistics and when I'm trying to explain to Czechs that even if you go to a state college or state university, in the state where you live, where you have permanent address, I think the average was somewhere around $20,000 a year for tuition fees. Of course, private universities can, we are talking about $40,000 a year, and it can vary very wildly. And that's what I'm trying to explain to Czechs who sometimes, ask me, what is the average salary in America? I can give them some numbers from the Office of Labor Statistics Office, which are valid, but I say, you don't even think about saving for the tuition fee for your children, saving for the college, which you have to do. I mean, if you are a responsible parent, which you have to do in the US, unless you want to send your child to the army or to the Navy or to the Marines, where they can get the education somehow more easily, financially speaking, etc. It's just a different system, and I think Czechs still don't realize, even young people, what kind of thing we have, that we have no tuition fee at university if you go to state universities, which are, by the way, more prestigious than the private universities in the Czech, not just in Czechia, in continental Europe, with the exception of Britain, which is not continental Europe.
Yes, I agree. The cost of universities, it's really high in America. And when we were talking about the sports, that's something also I realized last year when my child joined a cheer club at the beginning of the school year. It was just a parish one, so it wasn't private. It was very cheap, so you could see, all different kind of people coming there, meaning like not rich people, okay? And when the cheerleader coach came, she explained us how it works. And I realized later on that she is leading those girls until high school. And thanks to that program, a lot of kids from that specific high school in our neighborhood get scholarship to colleges. Okay, so it all makes sense to me now why those American parents are pushing sports in so many times, because that's another topic that American colleges, like give scholarships to the students to have a great team, because that's something we don't know in Europe at all. And please add something that if you have something, to add, but that's something when I'm talking to my American friends, I explain them and they don't absolutely understand it, because college sports, it's such a big deal in America. And such a big business too, right? That it's so big part of it. Yes, I have a lot of friends also, like Czech friends living in US, or even Turkish friends living in US, who are definitely considering sending their children back to Europe for studies. I think that's just one of the biggest advantages of our family. And not everybody has it that way too. I know many mixed families who just go with English, let's say, and make the decision for some reason. But we, from the beginning, we say we want to give the languages to the children. It's not easy. It's very difficult. And sometimes the children don't want to speak your language back because it's much easier to speak English, because English is everywhere around them. But I am quite strict with that. We do still in some way Czech school with my younger daughter. I want them to know the language, because that was always very something that I learned from my parents. They were always saying education. That's the most important thing in your life. So I'm trying to do the same thing and give them the options.
So how do you speak at home?
A good question. Yes, good question. We have a mixture. We speak whatever people feel at the moment. If I am just with my children, me and my daughters, I think I try to speak mostly Czech, but also, of course, sometimes they say something in English and I answer them in English, right? So there are different situations. Funny thing is, I realize when I'm upset with them, I start yelling in English. I don't know why. It's so interesting. It's just somehow easier. I feel that they understand me better if I yell in English. And I try not to yell, of course, but it happens. But then when my husband is with us, that's again different story. I always try to push him to speak Turkish, because he's the only source of their Turkish, in America. So they do sometimes, but they tend to go into English more often. And it gets more difficult as they grow older. Of course, when they were little, it was so easy to speak Czech all the time. But then they start going to school, or their friends, speak English. So English becomes their main language. And that's also amazing that we can come to Europe for 2 months every summer. And I can see how they change over those months. They really get better. They learned a lot of new words, and hopefully it's going to stay, hopefully it's in their brain already. I hope so.
Yeah, I think we've touched on that, this kind of prevailing influence, if you live in English-speaking world, that when the kids start going to school, if they are from mixed marriages, the English just starts to dominate for understandable reasons, I think. And good luck with keeping your kids speaking Czech if they don't go to school there.
Yeah, thank you. Look, but you know what? Yes, I am very realistic. I know it might change, my older daughter, she used to read in Czech books. Now she doesn't care anymore. She's like, Mom, it's so difficult. I don't understand. And the younger too, I'm reading her, still I'm trying to read her in Czech, not every evening, but I try to. And I can see she's 8 years old now, and I can see it's getting more and more difficult for her, because there's so many words that she doesn't hear in our daily life. Even though I'm speaking in Czech, the conversation at home is always about the same things, right? Like, did you brush your teeth? Did you make your homework? Let me tell you what happened in school. But you don't talk about, walking in a forest, naming those kind of trees, that are in the forest, and other themes. So when I'm reading her books in Czech, it's so difficult for her, because she stops me after 2 sentences and she's like, Mom, I really don't understand. So, reading normally 3-minute story takes us half an hour, because we have to stop. in so many words, and I'm explaining her. And then I'm trying to, for example, the next day or something, like bring that word, to our conversation. Or when I see, let's say, that tree, I say, like, remember we read about that tree in the book? That's what it is. But it's, as you can imagine, as a parent, it is exhausting. It's, you need so much energy, like, to really to keep that. But it's very rewarding, because my daughter, this 8-year-old, she went to school here in Czech Republic now, because our school year finishes in America. Our school year finishes at the end of May, and school year in Czech Republic finishes the last day of June. So we had chance to put her to Czech school for 2 weeks again. And I always have really great feedback from the teacher, and she, and that's something what a parent wants to hear and needs to hear to keep motivating itself, because, like, the teacher says, like, you're doing amazing job, and she is reading the same way like the kids that go to school year whole year. And of course she doesn't know every word, but she asks. She's not scared to ask, and that's the most important thing, that you can see that the kids have the interest. And with my older daughter, it's not about the language, but it's also, again, we are lucky enough to be here and travel and watch Czech TV sometimes, and go to a castle for a trip, go, to museum. And I can see that the older daughter, like, she really feels partly Czech, and I think Turkish too, because, like, we, in our family in New Orleans, we celebrate all the holidays. We celebrate American holidays. We celebrate Czech holidays. We, of course, have Santa Claus, and we have Ježíšek, the Jesus baby, for Christmas. We do Turkish holidays with our Turkish community. So, like, those kids are not very traditional Americans. And I love it about them. And I also think that's the beauty of America. I'm still living in this maybe a little naive idea, but for me, America is only this beautiful and amazing space in the world, because it's so full of different nations and cultures, because as I learn from her classmates about different cultures, same way, like, she is teaching them about Europe. Because unfortunately, again, I don't want to generalize, but my experiences, they really don't study no geography whatsoever. If I don't teach my children about the world, they don't know nothing. So I feel this is the amazing thing, that my kids can teach her friends, their friends, about Europe a little. That's the way how we can stay connected and keep it going.
Let me sum it up, and I will intentionally will kind of tweak my question a little bit. I don't want to sound too provocative, but let me ask you like this. So here you are, this Turkish-Czech family going to the United States, to this red state of Louisiana, red meaning pro-Republican, to this country that, if we follow media, we have an idea that, they will definitely go through your cell phones, what you've got on your social posts, etc. Even though you are American citizens, this is an extreme example, but Elon Musk is also an American citizen. And because he fell out with Donald Trump, now there were some calls for him to be deported back to South Africa, even though it's not probable. So you go to this country which is getting this ugly reputation, especially, I would say, in a liberal part of population of Europe. And you are not worried.
Please don't bring anxiety in my life, okay? I was going through anxiety attacks many times, and I'm finally, like, dealing with it in a good way. So,
I'm sorry, I didn't want to do that. No,
I know, I'm joking a little. Look, yes, I'm honestly a little worried about what is going on in America. Of course, I'm very, very unhappy to see the way how ICE is deporting people. And
let me just very briefly say, ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yes, and that is something that you need to think about, of course, because as you see, those laws are changing slowly. And somebody asked me the similar question like you just asked me now. And I said, look, we don't know if maybe one day, Donald Trump is going to wake up in the morning and he's going to say every naturalized citizen who got his naturalization in last 5 years. I'm just canceling it now. I'm exaggerating now, of course, but under all those news that we keep hearing everywhere, it might happen. I don't know. What do I know? But at the same time, I'm trying not to panic. I am trying to keep calm, and I believe that we can agree at the end. And I live in a community, like you mentioned it, like most of my neighbors are Republicans. And the neighbors I know, they're good people, in fact. And I wonder, I'm not brave enough to ask them what they think, how they see the changes, how they see the behavior of the offices, that they basically chase people. Okay, they're illegally here, but those people were promised something within the previous governments. They lived here for how many years, and specifically in New Orleans, like everybody says, like if there was no community of the illegal immigrants after Katrina, it would still be in a bad shape. Those people came and they rebuilt the city. Same thing happening in Los Angeles after the big fires. They were always part of American society. Yes, it's a specific topic that same like your friends in Czech ask you always about the average income and so on. Like my friends were always asking me, so what about those illegals? Like, how is this possible? And I tried to explain them that they're somehow part of the system. And it always worked like that. It was, good for America in some way for many years. And it's not fair to those people now that, that they had hope that they could legalize their status, and that hope is gone now.
I have also one question about immigration controls. I was trying to count it how many times I went through immigration coming to the United States, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, it's been dozens and dozens of times. I did have a problem once, but that was because I was tired. I was talking back. I was, I suppose, arrogant because the immigration officer didn't recognize my I visa, what it is. It is journalistic visa. And this was in Fort Lauderdale, to cut a long story short. And I was silly enough to arrogantly suggest, well, maybe you don't know what I visa is here in Fort Lauderdale, but in Washington or New York, I never have a problem with that. Meaning, I indicated that he or she was kind of regional, not dumbwit. I had to step back, and then I was nearly threatened to be detained. But then I calmed down, and I realized what a mistake I made, and it was my fault. In other words, I keep trying to be careful, and I've never had a problem. Now, I question, have you ever had a problem with immigration?
No, honestly. But again, I was always, my husband always told me and gave me a lesson for the beginning, American offices are no fun. You have to really respect police officers here and any kind of officers here, which I think, might be kind of sometimes problem for us Czechs, because here, you're stopped by traffic police and you try to joke with them, you try to put it down. Oh my gosh, what happened again? Why did you stop me? You know what I mean? These things are not possible in US. And I am sometimes, when I have friends who travel to US and I know them, that they're always those funny guys, trying to make jokes out of everything. I'm like, don't even try. Put that thing absolutely, behind you. You cannot do that. Here, you have to really respect what they say. That's what you do. So me knowing it, and I respect it, I respect it. I understand there are these immigration controls. So I'm always briefing my children too. I'm like, look, we are not fighting right now. We are not doing nothing. We are just, going through that for 5 minutes in absolutely quiet and respect and wait what happens. But again, I never was in a situation that I would have to be worried, I say. I had always visas, I had green card, now I have my American citizenship. I was always here legally, and I was just going to join my husband and, live my American life. And I think we are great addition to this American society. So, and also, like, let me mention, I don't know, we kind of like talk from a perspective of white people. I don't want to start this another whole discussion, but I am sure that people who don't have this skin color feel completely different. I hear it a lot. It's not that I'm making these things up, just reading from liberal media, but I talk to those people who live in the South and who have this experience of racism their whole life, and they are scared to being stopped by traffic police. Now we moved to a different story, and I don't want to start this discussion, but I think it's important to mention it, that me as a white lady crossing border is a completely different story than other people.
And you are absolutely right. And I suppose more than a middle-aged guy like me crossing the border, white from Europe, is probably a different experience than being, let's say, from Nigeria. And being a student or something like that. Let me ask you like this. Nevertheless, even as it is now, and you mentioned some of the concerns that you might have for the future and things can change, but right now you still see the future of your family as a, if I may repeat it, Turkish-Czech couple staying in New Orleans and raising a family there. It's still there. I mean, this kind of vision.
Look, that's a very, very difficult question because we are growing as people during the life, and there are different situations, different things change your way of thinking. So I made my own personal decision that I'm not going to make no plans anymore in my life, because we have expectations. We think it's going to be so much better like now. And like finally we have this dream of this like beautiful, happy family life. And then something happens and then you are not happy, So I try to live this personal really life where I just try to focus on little things, but at the same time, it's not that, don't get me wrong, it's not that I am not, like obviously I'm a journalist, like not that I'm not listening to the news, I know that I'm not worried like what's happening, but, and I mentioned it before, I am just here to show my children that if you study, if you know languages, the door is open everywhere and around the world. And, I think personally, we have nothing to be afraid of. We have beautiful lives there. We work for the community. I feel part of my American community, of the community of Republican neighbors, of community of liberal friends from New Orleans, from around U.S. It's always refreshing for me, of course, to go visit other cities. I just went to New York recently to give a lecture on Czech history based on recordings with the Czech immigrants who flew Czechoslovakia during war, after war, or during communism. And that is always very refreshing, of course, to talk to people with different opinions. I am a little worried about because I see it on the Louisiana politics, I'm a little worried about where it goes to. Like, for example, I was always raised, and I'm Catholic, okay? I was born Catholic, so that is part of me. But at the same time, I was raised in a very liberal family, and I consider Czech Republic as a liberal society, as me growing up. So I was always raised in a way that, for example, abortion is a choice, and it's my choice, and that is worrying me as a mother of two little girls. Is the abortion policy in Louisiana, where it's very difficult for girls, and it's only the beginning. We don't know where it can go. So these are quite examples of where I'm not very comfortable with the politics right now. Another thing is, again, I said I am Catholic, but at the same time, I believe that religion is something that shouldn't be part of state politics, and that is changing too. In Louisiana, for example, the law was passed that the 10 Commandments need to be printed out in every classroom. And of course, 10 Commandments to me are something that should be part of every society. And they are basically, something that tells you how to behave and how to be a nice person. But does it have to be in a classroom? my answer is no. That's something that should be part of family, and maybe special religious class, that it's option for everybody. So those are some specific things that that I'm not happy about, where my state of Louisiana is going to.
And I suppose this is a question that would, come to the minds of a lot of people. Have you ever considered moving away from Louisiana to some other U.S. state? Obviously, what I'm implying is, if you move to the state of New York, probably, or New York City, it's going to be completely different.
We had this conversation with a bunch of my friends, American friends in Louisiana, and we said, look, if everybody's going to leave, what's going to happen? We believe that there need to be people like us that show, people from other opinion group, also the other side of the coin. I really believe in that. And I'm not saying I want to completely change their mind. No, you know that you cannot change people's mind if they believe in something. But I believe that the discussion of two groups, really discussing it politely and inspiring each other, like telling them, look, did you read this book? This book might, open you up a little. And of course, it's more difficult in social media times when people don't read books as much, because it's much more easier to just read something for 1 minute and make your opinion based on that, right? And even though you don't know the real source, that's a very, very difficult situation we are in now. But we are not considering moving to different state now, of course, also from obvious reasons, as we have our jobs there, our kids study there, they have their friends, we have our Turkish and Czech family and American family, so that's not an option at the moment. And I don't think that would be a solution for anything, because there will be elections hopefully again, and things might change, and we need to kind of realize that America was always a divided country in between those two big opinion groups, and we just need to keep living together.
Julia, you've been so generous with your time, so I think I will ask you to do another interview when we will talk about the part of your life that we didn't mention at all, and that is yoga. And I'm sincerely, and I don't mean this as some kind of superficial remark, I'm sincerely interested to know what life is like, how hard it is for a Czech woman like you with such an international experience starting a business as a yoga teacher in New Orleans. So I will save that for our next meeting, if you don't mind. I would like to make one remark that struck me several times when you mentioned parish. First time I came to Louisiana, I didn't know why the heck they were talking about the parishes all the time. And it's dawned on me, it took me one day to realize, well, gosh, used to be French, Spanish kind of mixture. So parishes, of course, they are talking about counties.
Oh, yes. Yes. And that's the beauty of Louisiana. I don't want to sound just critical, how everything is bad here, because that's not true. Louisiana is a beautiful state full of absolute
idiosyncrasies, isn't it? Yeah.
The history and the culture reaches the mixture of exactly the Creoles from Caribbean, from France, then the Cajuns who came from Canada. All these things together, it just makes, we always call it it's like a gumbo, right? We call it just Louisiana is a gumbo, and gumbo is a famous New Orleans soup that mixes together veggies and seafood and chicken and sausage, and really things that you would think that they cannot be together in one bowl, but they do, and they taste amazingly. So this is something that I absolutely agree, and that's why we love Louisiana, and that's why people from around America love New Orleans and come to experience this generosity of South.
Julia, you will now maybe think or suspect me that I'm trying to blow your trumpet, but I literally got goosebumps as you were talking just now, because I wanted to have the final thing to say, please have a gumbo, for me, once you come back, because I simply love gumbo. Nevertheless, I will still finish with one question. And again, maybe slightly quibbling or nidopiš. It's like when we say in Czech, it's a nidopišská otázka. It's a quibbling question. So you're Czech, your husband is Turkish. What are your daughters? Are they Czech American? Are they Czech Turkish American? Are they Turkish American?
You would be surprised. We talk about it a lot at home because the younger one doesn't think about it yet, but the older one, the 12-year-old, she questions herself, and she says it, look, like, what am I? And I'm like, we are always telling her, look, like, you are what do you feel? How do you feel? What do you are? And she's like, I think I'm American, Czech, Turkish. Like, she'll, I don't want to sound that I just, a lot of people might think that I am just making it up to sound better or something like that. But, in our family, we really live those three cultures, maybe not equally, of course, but it changes in time. If we have Turkish grandparents visiting our house in New Orleans, of course, it mixes more, and we cook more Turkish food. We talk more Turkish, so it keeps changing within the family atmosphere, of course. But I believe that they will one day consider themselves. You know how in America it's very, very common to use American Italian, American Chinese. That's something American Irish. That's something very, very normal that people use. So I believe my kids will call themselves like that too one day, American Czech Turkish. I don't know.
I just remember that we repeatedly struck in Czechast. I mean, speaking to people from mixed families, that it's totally all right to have multiple identities. You can be Turkish, you can be American, you can be Czech at the same time. So perhaps your daughters will adopt something like that.
And you know what? Not only my daughters who were born there, but I feel the same. I already feel the same. It's crazy. Like, I was now in Turkey with my husband, and since I speak Turkish, we're like, sometimes people in Turkey are a little confused because I don't look Turkish, right? And we went out, we were ordering some drinks, and the waiter came and he was just giving us the menu in English. And I said, no, ben Türkçe anlıyorum ve konuşuyorum. I said, I speak Turkish. And he's like, oh, you're Turk. And I just like nodded, yes, like, over there, I just feel I'm one of them because I live there and my family is Turkish. So I feel the same thing. And I'm a big supporter of therapy for various reasons. And that's a topic that comes up in my therapy a lot, how difficult it is to keep changing those places. Like how I am completely different in America. I have different personal in America. When I came to Czech, I feel more like I am back to my childhood, as I say, like I have different behavior here. And then I'm in Turkey, the way how I talk, the way how I behave, it just changes. So I see it on myself that I am not Czech anymore, only Czech anymore.
So let's talk about that the next time, and I hope you will find the time. But before we go, I cannot help asking you. So now say in Turkish, say goodbye, invite the listeners to listen to your podcast, Doma ve státech or Home in the States, which is in Czech, but also in English. But say it in Turkish, please.
Oh my gosh, that is so cute. I love using my Turkish. Okay. Çok teşekkürler. Güle güle. Ve lütfen benim podcast dinlemek isterseniz YouTube'da açabilirsiniz. Doma ve státech adı. Çok teşekkürler ve iyi günler.
Well, thank you. That was perfect. And speak to you soon. Thank you.
Yes, it was a pleasure. I hope I wasn't too long, but you know how it is when two reporters meet. We talk a lot. But thank you so much for amazing questions, and thank you for your podcast. I'm also a big fan of it.
That's all for today's episode of Czechast. I'd like to thank my guest, Julia Urbišová, and as we mentioned at the end, we are getting ready to continue our conversation next time about her everyday life as a yoga teacher in New Orleans. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider following, liking, or sharing Czechast with your friends. You'll find us on all the usual podcast platforms. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please don't hesitate and write. I'm Vít Pohanka. Thank you for listening. Take care, stay curious, and until next time, naslyšenou.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.